The squeak of the cart's left wheel was the only sound that belonged to her. Everything else, the whisper of the climate control through polished brass vents, the faint, expensive scent of leather from the boardroom, the distant hum of Los Angeles far below, was part of a world she only ever cleaned. Chloe pushed the cart along the silent, 30th floor corridor, the thick pile of the carpet swallowing the sound of her sensible shoes. Her dark blue dress was practical, her white apron starched and clean. At 18, she had learned that invisibility was a survival skill. She was the janitor, the night shift girl, part of the scenery that people with important lives looked straight through. Tonight, the silence was wrong. It was a thick, angry thing, leaking from under the heavy oak doors of the main conference room. Usually by this hour, the meetings were done. But tonight, the lights were still on, casting a severe, rectangular glow onto the marble floor. She could hear voices, sharp and strained, speaking in languages she recognized. A man was shouting in Russian, his words clipped and furious. Another answered in what sounded like frustrated Italian. She paused her cart, her hand resting on the handle of a spray bottle. Company policy was clear: avoid occupied rooms. But something in the tension held her there, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of her shift. The door swung open with a violent shove, and a tall, florid man in a rumpled suit stormed out, cursing in Portuguese. He didn't even see her. He was followed by another, then another, a parade of defeated-looking men in expensive suits, all muttering into their phones. 12 of them. She counted. They looked like the city's top interpreters, the kind whose time was billed in 4-figure increments. The room behind them was suddenly quiet. Chloe knew she should move on, finish her floor, and clock out. But a strange curiosity, a thread of audacity she rarely allowed herself to follow, pulled her toward the open door. She peered inside. The conference room was vast, dominated by a table of gleaming black mahogany that reflected the city lights like a dark, still lake. At the far end sat one man. He was perfectly still, a statue carved from shadows and discipline. His suit was a dark charcoal wool, so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His hands, one resting on the table and the other in his lap, were elegant and still. He wasn't looking at the chaos of the departing interpreters. He was looking at a stack of documents spread before him. She knew who he was. Everyone in the building knew. Ryo Tanaka, the man who owned the top 5 floors. The man whose name was spoken in whispers by the security staff. They said he was in logistics shipping. They said he was powerful. They said he was Yakuza. A younger man, his face tight with anxiety, stood beside Tanaka. "Sir," he said in deferential English. None of them could handle the dialects. The source documents are too varied. The Cypriot legal clauses, the Brazilian port manifests, the Farsi annotations on the schematics, it's a mess. They can't agree on a single coherent translation. Tanaka did not look up. He simply tapped a single, manicured finger on one of the papers. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The room seemed to grow colder. Chloe's eyes drifted to the documents, visible even from the doorway. She saw the Cyrillic script of the Russian contract, the flowing curves of Arabic on a bill of lading, the familiar shape of Mandarin characters on a technical manual. And then she saw it. A short, handwritten note on the corner of a deed, written not in standard Portuguese, but in a specific, rural dialect her grandmother from Bahia used to speak. A dialect full of unique idioms and phrasing that a textbook translator would butcher. Without thinking, without considering the monumental breach of protocol, the words left her mouth, quiet but clear in the heavy silence. "That note," she said. "It says the shipment's weight is falsified. It's a warning from the dock manager." The room froze. The young subordinate spun around, his eyes wide with shock, finally seeing her. The janitor. The girl with the cart. But Ryo Tanaka did not turn. He simply lifted his head, and his eyes found hers in the reflection of the polished table. They were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of surprise. It was as if he had been expecting her. "Come here," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the entire space, a low command that permitted no argument. She felt a tremor of fear, a cold realization of what she had just done. She had stepped out of the shadows. She had made herself seen. Her feet moved before her mind could protest, carrying her across the plush carpet until she stood at the edge of the great table. Her worn apron felt flimsy and ridiculous in the face of his silent power. He pushed the stack of papers toward her with one deliberate motion. "Prove it," he said. For the next hour, she moved through the documents like a conductor leading an orchestra. The angry Russian contract was not just a contract. It was a veiled threat, its clauses laced with underworld slang she'd picked up from old novels. The Italian shipping ledger used a Sicilian dialect to hide its true cargo. The Arabic bill of lading had coded phrases woven into the descriptions, a trick she'd learned from a history documentary. She moved from Mandarin to German, from legal Spanish to technical Farsi. She didn't just translate the words, she translated the intent, the culture, the danger hidden between the lines. The room was silent save for the sound of her voice and the rustle of paper. The subordinate stood by, his face a mask of disbelief. Tanaka watched her, his gaze unwavering, analytical. He didn't praise her. He didn't react at all. He just listened, his stillness a heavy weight in the room. When she finally set the last document down, her voice slightly hoarse, the city outside had grown quiet. "The deal is a trap," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "They're using your own supply lines to move against you, financed by the sale of your own assets. It's a multi-pronged betrayal." Tanaka finally looked away from her, his gaze settling on the glittering cityscape beyond the window. The silence stretched, each second a year long. She had revealed everything. She had made herself indispensable, and in his world, that was the most dangerous thing to be. He rose from his chair. He was taller than she'd expected, his presence filling the space he occupied. He walked around the table until he stood before her. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could smell the faint, clean scent of sandalwood and something like fresh rain on pavement. "What is your name?" he asked. "Chloe," she whispered. He said her name, a soft echo. Chloe, it sounded different in his mouth. Not like a name, but like a fact. A piece on a board, he was just now noticing. His subordinate, Kenji, stepped forward. "Sir, what should we do with her? She knows everything." Tanaka's eyes never left hers. "She is no longer the janitor," he said, his voice calm and absolute. "She is a security risk. And an asset. She comes with us." It was not a negotiation. Kenji moved to her side, his hand hovering near her arm, ready to force her if she resisted. But she didn't. She knew resistance was futile. She had walked through a door that only locked from behind. As she was escorted from the room, she glanced back at her abandoned cart, its yellow plastic frame and mismatched bottles looking absurdly out of place. Her old life, simple and invisible, was sitting right there, and she was walking away from it, into the back of a black, silent car with a man who moved through the world like he owned the very air everyone else breathed. The car door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing her inside with the quiet, dangerous man and the city lights that blurred past the tinted window like a life she could no longer touch. The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress disguised as a museum. It occupied the entire top floor, a sprawling expanse of glass, steel, and shadow. The furniture was minimal, each piece a work of art. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of an air filtration system. It was the cleanest place Chloe had ever been, and it felt more sterile than any hospital. Her room was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed with white linens, a bathroom of black marble, and a closet containing a few simple, expensive items of clothing in her size: silk blouses, tailored trousers, a cashmere sweater. Her blue dress and apron were gone. She knew without asking that they had been burned. Ryo Tanaka did not leave loose ends. For 3 days, she was a ghost in his palace. She saw him only when he brought her new documents. He would enter her room without knocking, place a file on the table, and leave. He never spoke to her. He just watched. She would work for hours, unraveling the tangled threads of his empire, translating coded messages from his contacts and threats from his enemies. She learned that his business was a global octopus, its tentacles in everything from high-tech shipping to illegal antiquities. She also learned he was at war. The primary threat was a Russian syndicate, the Antonov Bratva. They were the ones behind the trap she'd uncovered. They were aggressive, brutal, and expanding into his territory. Her translations became his primary source of intelligence. She was his secret weapon, locked in a gilded cage. On the fourth day, the quiet shattered. She was in the main living area, looking out at the panoramic view of the city, when a sound like a giant whip cracking echoed through the penthouse. A spiderweb of cracks erupted on the floor-to-ceiling window, not 10 feet from where she stood. Before she could even scream, Tanaka was moving. He crossed the vast room in a blur of motion, his body slamming into hers, driving her to the floor behind a thick marble column. His weight was heavy, solid, and for a terrifying second, all she could smell was sandalwood and gunpowder. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear. Kenji and 2 other men in dark suits appeared, guns drawn, their movements practiced and economical. They took positions, their eyes scanning the buildings across the way. "Sniper," Kenji reported, his voice tight. "Single shot. High caliber." They missed. Tanaka pushed himself off her, his focus already elsewhere. But as he moved, she saw it. A dark gash on his forearm where a shard of flying glass had sliced him. Blood, dark and rich, welled up, dripping onto the pristine white floor. He seemed not to notice. He was issuing orders, his voice calm and precise, orchestrating his defense. But Chloe saw only the blood. She saw the one piece of chaos in his perfectly controlled world. While his men secured the perimeter, she scrambled to her feet and ran to the cavernous bathroom. She found a first aid kit under the sink. Her hands didn't shake. In the chaos of her old life, she'd learned to handle emergencies. Her mother was a nurse, and the lessons had stuck. She returned to find him standing by the broken window, looking down at the street below as if daring them to shoot again. "You're bleeding," she said. He glanced at his arm as if it belonged to someone else. "It's nothing." "It needs to be cleaned," she insisted, stepping closer. She opened the kit. The antiseptic smell was sharp and familiar. He watched her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. But then he extended his arm. He sat on the edge of a low sofa, the very picture of calm, as she knelt before him. Her fingers were gentle as she cleaned the wound. The cut was deeper than she'd thought. His skin was cool to the touch. She worked in silence, her focus absolute. This was something she knew how to do. Mending, fixing, cleaning up a mess. As she wrapped a clean white bandage around his forearm, her fingers brushed against his wrist. He didn't flinch, but she felt a sudden, sharp tension in him, a current of energy that had nothing to do with the attack. She looked up, and her breath caught. He was looking at her, but not at her hands. He was looking at her face, his gaze intense, searching. The distance between them was suddenly gone, collapsed into the few inches that separated their faces. The world outside, the danger, the snipers, it all faded away, leaving only the sound of their breathing in the silent room. That was when he spoke about his sister. "Her name was Akiko," he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "She was an interpreter. Years ago there was a deal. A peace treaty with a rival clan. The translation had to be perfect. The honor of both families depended on it." He looked away, toward the broken window. The interpreter they hired made a mistake. A single word. He translated concession as surrender. A matter of honor became an act of shame. His jaw tightened. War broke out. Akiko was caught in the first wave of retaliation. "She was taken from me because of one word." He fell silent. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and heavy. He wasn't just telling her a story. He was telling her why her skill mattered. He was showing her the wound he carried, the shame of a failure he could not prevent. She finished tying the bandage, her hands moving with a tenderness she hadn't intended. She had a chance right then to run. During the confusion, an emergency exit had been left unguarded. She could have slipped away, disappeared back into the city. But hearing his story, seeing that brief, unguarded flash of pain, she knew she wouldn't. She had made a choice without even realizing it.
She chose to stay.
She met his gaze again. "I won't make a mistake," she said softly. A long moment passed. He searched her eyes, and whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He said her name again, just one word. Chloe, but this time, it was not a fact. It was an acknowledgement. It was the first crack in the ice. The war with the Antonov Bratva escalated. The sniper was just a greeting card. A car bomb was found attached to one of his transport trucks at the port. A raid on one of his warehouses turned into a bloody firefight. Chloe became the nerve center of his counteroffensive. She lived in a room filled with communications equipment, listening to the Bratva's radio chatter, translating their coded messages, and predicting their movements. She learned the rhythms of their speech, the personalities of their commanders, the fear in the voices of their soldiers. She also saw a side of Ryo Tanaka that chilled her to the bone. She saw him give an order that resulted in the complete disappearance of 3 of the Bratva's enforcers. There was no emotion in his voice, just cold, surgical precision. He was not just a businessman, he was a killer. A king ruling an empire of violence. It should have made her run. It should have terrified her. And it did. But it also fascinated her. The sheer, unshakable control he possessed was both monstrous and captivating. The turning point came during a transport. They were moving her to a new, more secure safe house. They traveled in a 3-car convoy, sleek black sedans gliding through the concrete canyons of downtown. Chloe was in the middle car, with Tanaka beside her and Kenji in the front passenger seat. The ambush was brutally efficient. A sanitation truck blocked the road in a narrow underpass, and 2 black SUVs boxed them in. Men in tactical gear poured out, assault rifles spitting fire. The world dissolved into a storm of noise, the roar of engines, the percussive slam of bullets against armored steel, the shattering of glass. Tanaka moved again, with that impossible speed. He threw himself over her, his body a solid wall, pushing her down to the floor of the car. The air was thick with the smell of cordite. She could feel the impact of bullets vibrating through his body into hers. "Kenji, left flank." Tanaka's voice was a blade cutting through the chaos. The firefight was a blur of terrifying moments. She saw Kenji return fire through the windshield. She saw the driver slump over the wheel. One of the Russians managed to wrench her door open, his face a mask of brutal determination. He reached for her. Before his fingers could touch her, Tanaka was up. He moved in the cramped space of the car with a grace that was utterly lethal. A knife appeared in his hand as if by magic. There was a wet, tearing sound, and the Russian collapsed backward, a silent scream on his face. Tanaka was already turning, firing his own weapon out the open door, providing cover for Kenji. But he had been exposed. One of the Bratva soldiers got a clear shot. Chloe saw the man raise his rifle. She saw the muzzle flash. She screamed Tanaka's name. He twisted, but he wasn't fast enough. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He grunted in pain, stumbling back against the seat, his face suddenly pale. For one heart-stopping second, she thought he was dead. The world went silent. The fear that shot through her was not for herself. It was for him. Pure, acid terror. That was the moment something inside her broke. The line between victim and participant, between observer and accomplice, vanished. Seeing him fall, she felt not fear, but rage. Kenji and the other guards were pushing the Bratva back, but one of the SUVs was preparing to ram them. Through the shattered window, Chloe could see the driver, a thick-necked man with a cruel smile, revving the engine. In the chaos, no one was paying attention to the Bratva's open radio channel, crackling on a handset that had fallen to the floor. She grabbed it. She recognized the voice of the Bratva's field commander, Ivan, shouting orders. And she knew what she had to do. She pressed the transmit button. Unit 3, pull back. Pull back now, she yelled in flawless, panicked Russian, perfectly mimicking the accent and cadence of one of their lieutenants. It's a trap. The target is a decoy. The main assault is on the warehouse. Abort. There was a moment of confused silence on the other end. Then Ivan's voice, full of fury. Who is this? What unit? This is Sokolov. We're being slaughtered. They knew we were coming. Get out. She filled her voice with the sound of the firefight, with manufactured terror. It worked. Through the window, she saw the man in the SUV hesitate, his smile faltering. He looked at his own radio, then back at their car. The uncertainty was all Tanaka's men needed. Kenji's team flanked the remaining SUVs, and the ambush fell apart. The Bratva retreated in a screech of tires and confusion. Silence descended on the underpass, broken only by the ticking of a cooling engine and the distant wail of sirens. Chloe dropped the handset, her body trembling with adrenaline. She had just given a false order that sent men, however monstrous, into a different kill zone. She had used her voice not just to translate, but to deceive.
To kill.
Tanaka was slumped against the door, his hand pressed to his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. But he was watching her. His eyes, dark with pain, held a new, startling intensity. Later, in the new safe house, after a silent doctor had stitched his shoulder, he found her. She was standing by a window, staring at her own hands as if she didn't recognize them. I helped you, she said, her voice barely a whisper.
Elite.
People are probably dead because of me. He came to stand beside her. The scent of antiseptic clung to him, sharp and clean. You ensured our survival, he corrected, his voice a low rasp. She finally looked at him. This is what you do. This is your world. I don't belong here. Don't you? He challenged softly. He took a step closer, crowding her against the cold glass of the window. The space between them hummed with a dangerous energy. You did not hesitate. You did not panic. You saw a weapon and you used it. You saved us. I'm not like you, she insisted, her voice shaking. I can't be. I know, he said, and his good hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was electric, a shock to her system. You feel. You carry the weight of it. That is the difference. His eyes bored into hers, and the confession that came was not one of love, but something far more raw and honest. Being near you is the only time I remember what that is like. It is a weakness I cannot afford, and one I will not give up. The Bratva was furious. They knew they had been tricked by a voice, a ghost on their comms. They put out the word, find the woman. Find Tanaka's siren. The threat was no longer about territory. It was personal. She was the target now. The final confrontation was inevitable. Tanaka didn't believe in hiding. He believed in cutting the head off the snake. He arranged a meeting with Ivan Antonov, the head of the Bratva, under the pretense of negotiating a truce. It would take place in a neutral location, a closed, historic theater in the heart of the city. It was a trap, of course. Both sides knew it. Chloe was the key. Her role was to accompany Tanaka, posing as his personal translator. The Bratva would want to see the siren they'd been hunting. Her presence was both the bait and the signal. At a precise moment, she was to say a specific phrase in Russian, "The performance is over," which would be the cue for Tanaka's men, hidden throughout the theater, to strike. She walked onto the grand stage of the old theater at Tanaka's side. The cavernous space was empty except for the ornate, velvet-draped boxes and the men on stage. Ivan Antonov was a bear of a man, his expensive suit stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He stood with his 5 most trusted killers. Tanaka stood with only Kenji. The illusion of vulnerability was perfect. Ivan's eyes landed on Chloe, a piggish, cruel smile spreading across his face. So, he boomed in heavily accented English. This is the little bird who sings so prettily on the radio. He switched to Russian, his words dripping with contempt. I thought you would be more beautiful. He must be desperate to use a fat, dark-skinned child as a weapon. Chloe felt a flash of hot anger, but she didn't let it show. She met his gaze, her expression placid. Tanaka remained perfectly still beside her, but she felt the temperature around him drop by 10 degrees. She replied in flawless, formal Russian, her voice carrying clearly in the theater's acoustics. Your assumptions, like your grammar, are flawed. Perhaps you should spend less time underestimating your opponents and more time studying your own language. The insult, so calmly and perfectly delivered, stunned Ivan into silence. His face purpled with rage. He had expected a frightened girl, not this composed, defiant woman. He had lost control of the room before the negotiation even began. He lunged for her, abandoning all pretense. I will tear that clever tongue from your head. This was not the plan. He was supposed to negotiate, to be drawn into Tanaka's web. His rage had made him unpredictable. His men raised their weapons. Kenji moved to intercept, but he was outnumbered. In that split second, Chloe knew she couldn't wait for Tanaka's signal. Ivan was focused on her, his guard down. This was the only opening they would get. She looked directly into Ivan's furious eyes and spoke, her voice ringing with cold authority. The performance is over. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then, the theater erupted. From the shadowy balconies and the wings of the stage, Tanaka's men emerged, their weapons fitted with silencers. The sound was a series of soft coughs, brutally efficient. Ivan's men fell before they could even register the attack. Ivan himself froze, his face a mask of disbelief, his hand still outstretched toward her. Tanaka moved, a dark blur, and the conflict was ended with a single, precise motion. Silence returned to the stage, thick and final. It was over. Chloe stood amidst the carnage, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She had not been rescued. She had seen the moment, seized it, and brought the war to its end. Tanaka walked toward her, ignoring the bodies on the floor. He stopped in front of her, his dark eyes searching her face. There was no praise for her bravery, no acknowledgement of the terror she must have felt. There was only a quiet, profound understanding. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently tuck a stray curl behind her ear. The gesture was shockingly intimate, a moment of impossible softness in a sea of violence. They called you an asset, he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. They were wrong. An asset can be replaced. His gaze held hers, unwavering and absolute. You cannot. In that moment, he claimed her, not with words of love or possession, but with a simple, undeniable truth. In his world of disposable soldiers and fleeting loyalties, she had become permanent. Weeks later, the city was quiet. The Antonov Bratva was a memory, its territory absorbed into Tanaka's empire. Chloe stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the endless grid of lights below. Her old life felt like a story she'd read about someone else. The girl with the mop and the squeaky cart was gone, erased by blood and secrets. She wore a simple black dress of heavy silk that felt like armor. She heard him approach, the soft sound of his shoes on the stone. He came to stand beside her, a silent pillar of strength. The air between them was no longer fraught with tension, but filled with a comfortable, shared quiet. The world down there, he said, his voice a low murmur against the night air. It is for them. The world we stand in, it is ours. He placed a small, heavy object on the railing between them.
It was a key.
Not to a room, but to a custom-armored car she'd never seen before. Beside it, he placed a passport with a new name and a plane ticket to anywhere she wanted to go. You can leave, he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I will have you escorted safely out of the country. You can have a new life. Far from all this, he paused, then turned to face her, his expression unreadable. But they will never stop looking for you. The only place you will ever be truly safe is by my side. It was the only choice he would ever give her. A cage of her own choosing, or a world where she would always be prey. Chloe looked from the key to his face. She saw the killer, the king, the man who carried the ghost of his sister in the quiet chambers of his heart. She saw the man who had shielded her with his own body, who had confessed his own weakness to her, who had declared her irreplaceable. She reached out, her fingers closing not around the key, but around his hand. His skin was cool, his grip surprisingly strong as his fingers laced with hers. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She turned back to the city, her reflection in the glass now standing beside his. A janitor and a king. A survivor and a killer. Two worlds, two lives, collided and forged into something new, something dangerous, something absolute. The city glittered below them, a kingdom she had never wanted, and a throne she was now, and forever, bound to share.